Today on the Next, our guests are Matt Wheeler and Chris Meade, co-founders of SportsRecruits. SportsRecruits fuels millions of recruiting connections every year, helping student athletes get recruited and play the sport they love in college. For athletes, they help you build a recruiting presence, connect with college coaches, and commit to your best fit school. For coaches, they help you know and discover the recruits that you need so you can build winning teams. And for clubs, they help give your athletes every opportunity to be seen and get recruited. And of course, to help you as a club differentiate from other clubs. Now, I was excited for this one. Chris and Matt actually went to my alma mater, Wesleyan, and they're a little younger. We didn't overlap, but go Wes. And they also have a fascinating story. They played lacrosse together in college and went their separate ways after graduation, one to reinsurance and one to commercial real estate. And they came back together around this observation of inefficiencies in the sports recruiting process. And they talk in the episode about the challenging early days where it took them over 18 months of wandering in the desert to find a profitable model. They started by filming lacrosse events, one event at a time, and which brought in some money but wasn't scalable. Then they talked about their transition by necessity to digital. We talked about their experience working with clubs and what they learned along the way. Talked about how the business scaled and how they ultimately found their footing and raised very little capital along the way and built a healthy, impressive, profitable business. And then, of course, we talked about the recent acquisition. They announced recently that they were joining IMG Academy and its NCSA college recruiting platform, and that together they'll deliver even more value to student athletes, families, coaches, and event operators navigating an increasingly complex recruiting process. Now, it was interesting to me because I'm coming at it more from the player development side, just giving the players the goods, and these guys are helping the players with whatever goods they've got to navigate the recruiting process. Each of them matter, they feed each other, and if I'm going to head into player development with athletes, I think it's important to understand what's happening on the recruiting side as well. At any rate, great discussion. Thanks for coming on, guys. Matt, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks Happy to be here.
That was in unison. I'm psyched to do this. I didn't know you guys, but we all went to the same undergrad. I was a little older, and I worked in sports. I think maybe before you guys worked in sports, or maybe around the same time, because SportsRecruits was a long ride, but we didn't cross paths back then. But now I'm making my triumphant return to the sports tech and youth sports, and you guys have been in it all along. And I had the chance to connect with Matt recently, and Matt, you've been so generous with your time and encouragement, and you've been a river guide of sorts as I've come in. You've made me believe that I'm sane and that what I'm doing is okay. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, you guys are an important pillar company in the space, and of course, just had a recent outcome, and there's a lot to talk about there. And so I'm grateful that you're making the time to do it. Excited to dive in. Great. Well, for starters, you guys, before we recorded, you were telling me that you were co-captains of lacrosse at Wesleyan, and I think you guys started this right out of school, right? So is that true? Or not right out of school? We had a
Matt,
few
you want
years.
to give the 3-minute overview?
Yeah, I mean, go back to 2005. There were no tech jobs. There was no one was leaving Wesleyan to go work at Facebook or TikTok or Google. It just wasn't happening.
That's true, because I got out of school in 98, rode that bubble, and then that 05 was like it was like nearing the end of the dark years there.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much like, I went into reinsurance, a company called Guy Carpenter, and Chris went into commercial real estate. And, the playbook back then was kind of, you did your 2 years and then you went to business school. And so that was the path we were both on. Chris found himself in Salt Lake City, Utah in 2007 and got linked up with the lacrosse team and pretty much realized the recruiting process was pretty much the same as it was when we were going through it in 99. But the world had changed a lot in that 8 years or so. You had Facebook, people were using email, you had YouTube. So it should have been improved. And, Chris learned pretty quickly working with these Utah families that, they were just sending DVDs in the mail and crossing their fingers and hoping it worked out. And so, I actually did dig up the email, Chris. I've been waiting to really settle in and read it. But Chris wrote me this crazy email in October of 2007 with this kind of rudimentary idea. And
What I'd love to know the timestamp on that email. Like, was it 4:38 a.m.?
I think it was like on a red eye back there, like a late flight back to Utah or something. But yeah, it was a kind of a late night, kind of like Jerry Maguire type email. And I think
Him
I
and
just
the
read it,
fifth.
and I
Him and
just
the
was like,
fifth,
yeah,
right? The fish was leaving with me.
yeah. And I was like, let's do it. And so I was already taking the GMATs, and so I was already 1 foot out the door. And so I mean, yeah, that was 17 years ago. So I guess the rest is history.
It was a pure Jerry Maguire moment in that I got roped into coaching like early days of travel club lacrosse in Utah, so hotbed area. I was paid minimum wage to take a team to a tournament up in New Hampshire. And I'm like at this tournament and I was like, this is insanely inefficient. And yeah, was back on the plane going to Salt Lake City and yeah, wrote that email.
And what was the initial germ of an idea?
Really, I mean, it was a really fun time because we were kind of on that like first Facebook wave of, I think Wesleyan might have been like the 12th or 13th school to be on Facebook. Twitter had just launched, like YouTube was starting to pick up steam. And like we were in those products every day. And it was like, well, why don't we just take all of this stuff that's happening on the internet right now and just like make the recruiting process way more efficient? So take like analog processes, digitize them, and somebody should find value in that and pay us money for it.
And of course, that's not necessarily how it worked. So you launched the product, and we quickly realized that video is really the lifeblood of our business. And we launched in lacrosse specifically. We started with lacrosse. It was called lacrosserecruits.com. And no one had video. I mean, video was kind of like, unlike football, where video was really part of the culture. Video in lacrosse back then, like you weren't going to tournaments, and there was no film option to buy your film from tournaments.
So all these like fit cameras you see on stands now and stuff, none of that existed.
None of that existed, and so we essentially were banging our heads against the wall for the first 18 months, making close to no revenue until we went to a guy who we still know to this day and said, "Hey, can we come to your showcase and film the event?" And they're like, "Why would you want to do that?" And I'm like, "Well, we think if we bundle the film with our Lacrosse Recruits membership, and maybe we'll build a highlight reel as well for the kid, like we might be cooking with gas here." And the guy said, "Yeah, sure, come on down. You guys are two lunatics, but yeah, sure, come on down." And like we made more money in 36 hours than we made the previous 18 months. And so then, we were really kind of off to the races from there.
So was the initial go-to-market like putting a camera crew at games?
Go-to-market, that wasn't even a term we knew. We weren't talking in SaaS or go-to-market. It was pretty much like we built a really good product, what we thought was a really good product. We showed it to families and they said, "This is incredible. Like I can send video to coaches." This is 2008, but I don't have any video. And so, so the next kind of 5 years or so was a journey of like, how do we build out the infrastructure so families have a lot of video? And then when they have a lot of video, they can really get a lot of value out of our product.
Uh-huh. And so how did you manage the chicken and egg in the early days of, it's like, if we get all the footage, then, the more footage we have, the more families we can get, but without the families and the paying, how do you justify hiring the crews to go take all the footage? So like, how did you break that cycle of doom in terms of getting those first few steps?
It was definitely like a lot of trial and error, but just like the basic concept of the highest end recruiting events have the most committed, highest level of student athlete. And generally those families have invested the most into the process. So in those early days, it was like a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because you had these families that were already super committed, spending all of this money. And then we were just like another thing that they were spending more money on, as long as you were positioned at those events and you were able to communicate the value in a like easy way. Though, like Matt said, like, 2008, this one weekend, it was fall of 2008 and we're like, oh my goodness, like we figured this out. And basically for like the next 2 years, we just doubled the amount of like high-end events that we partnered with. And you just had this really targeted high-end customer base to market to. And there's a lot of growth there. So there wasn't really like much that you were missing until that third year when now like the drop off of all of those events, came down, and now you're like, oh man, well, we have to do these like 6 like mid-tier events to get these 2 really good events. And that's where you start to be like, oh, well, they need us to have a film crew here, but this really doesn't make us much money, but we better make a lot of money in these 2 events. And that's where like things start to get like a little bit more complicated. And honestly, like the more we dealt with those problems, you were like, oh, this business is terrible. Like, we actually need a software company. And like, that was probably like a pretty defining point, in 2011, 2012, where like Matt and I looked at each other and we're like, we're traveling like 25, 26 weekends a year.
It was
And
all
you're
you
like,
guys?
oh yeah, it was crazy. It was like 6 people.
I
Yeah.
definitely have some Billy Madison visuals. Right? Or no, Tommy Boy. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's pretty accurate. I mean, but I think again, like reflecting on our adventure here and like thinking of like lessons learned and how I might apply it to like a new business or whatever. Well, what we could have done is we could have just sat behind our computers and tried to iterate and iterate and iterate until whatever we landed on something. But that would have not worked. And so like we had to go out and film the crappy events, and we had to do all this absurd stuff because that actually generated revenue. Like what we wanted people to buy all along was the platform. That remains true to this day. But like we had to do those other things as like a bridge to get people to buy the platform. And obviously you hope as an entrepreneur that like you can actually connect the 2 bridges. Actually, the bridge makes it to the other side. You don't get caught in the middle. But we didn't really have any other choice. Like we had to go film those events, and fortunately we learned a lot. And as you get more reps, you then come up with like the club product, which is what ended up being our kind of calling card, which is selling into these travel teams versus just doing these events. And that's what that became our bread and butter from kind of 2015 on, is this kind of SaaS product selling to these travel teams.
And not to like glorify it too much, but like we spent a lot of time traveling, a lot of time in the car together, but we were forced to interact with our customers every weekend.
Oh.
And you were having conversations with them, and like you knew every segment, every like demo within the like general population. You're like, what products are going to hit for certain like customers, certain levels of clubs. And I really do think like that ended up being like the superpower from those like early years, where like there's nobody else who spent more time on the ground in the recruiting space than like we did. And we were just kind of like gluttons for punishment to get there. But like that was like something that really set us apart in those early years.
Yeah, there is no substitute for it. And I mean, I wish there was, because I mean, as I set out to build now, being a road warrior isn't really on the agenda yet, but I mean, it works. I mean, there is no substitute for it. So before you had the software, when you're out there at the events, what was the deliverable at that time? So you record the event and you're there to pitch the product to the families after the event. What was the pitch?
So again, going back to the day the product launched, June of 2008, Lacrosse Recruits, it's still, to this day, the product has a lot of the core concepts, which is you can research schools on there. You can, going back to 2008, you could communicate. We had a messaging system where you could actually communicate with any college program in the country through the platform, because we loaded in all the email addresses. So you had this experience as a user where you can communicate out. We always wanted people to use that. But what we were fighting was people weren't quite, there was this concept, and there still remains today, that like everything happens live. Like coaches need to see you live, and forget the internet. Like who needs the internet? Like they need to see you live. And so we were fighting kind of this, fighting against just like kind of an uneducated consumer, but also just, it's early. It's again, we're 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. But what the families knew they did need, they knew they needed video of their kid playing against high quality competition. So we did our best to provide the best video possible of that. And then we helped the parents understand how, now that you have this video, wouldn't it be really nice to be able to send that video out to, let's say, 25 schools in about 5 or 10 minutes versus you going and making 25 DVD copies. Again, this is what was happening. DVD copies and going to the USPS and making an envelope for each of these 25 schools. And so it was really like once they had the video, it was kind of an easier conversation because it's like, cool, what are you going to do with this video? And they're like, actually, I don't know. I have the video, which I'm told is important. And so it was really just a journey.
Was the video a DVD?
Video was on a DVD. Yeah, in those days, video was on a DVD.
Hope you guys have pictures of this.
I mean, we were showing up to the post office at close. Sometimes it's 500 envelopes, and the people would see us walking in, and they would go, "Not these guys again!" Like we were, like they're gonna make us work 5 minutes later, but we were here at 4:58. You close at 5. Like you need to take all these packages in. We got a post office guy came up to our office and yelled at us because our intern stuffed all the packages in like one of the blue USPS bins, and they pulled it out, saw the return address, like literally marched up to our office and yelled at us.
And so was it a one-time purchase at that time? It was just buying the video?
We would see the same families at 5 or 6 different events. So to Chris's point, we had to make sure the quality was good, because if the quality was bad at the event in June, in July, they knew that they were going to see our tent and they could march up and give it to us. So like to Chris's point, like it was really nice. We had to keep everything as tight as possible because we knew we were going to see those families multiple times throughout the summer and the fall. So, obviously kept us accountable, but yeah,
you were like the high quality video guys for that tournament. So if I want high quality video, and it's like, is it like highlights or is it the full video?
You would take that video and we would build you a highlight reel as well. So we had a little video team that would make a highlight, put an ISO effect on there. And I mean, Chris, I think we're having PTSD because like we don't really.
I know.
Because
I know this side of you is dormant.
No, yeah, and it's funny because we haven't spoken about this stuff in so long, but yeah, like it was totally insane. So that family would go to 6 events. They'd get like 5 DVDs of their 5 games from the 6 events. So they'd have 30 DVDs at their house. They would take the time codes and fill out a form. We had a full like editing team that had all the masters in the office that I don't know if everything was digitized. At one point, like we were going back to DVDs to like use those at masters to create the highlight reels, but like it was a totally insane like point in time.
And so if I'm hearing right, the tournament companies expected you to have coverage at all of their events if you wanted any of their events because they needed coverage at these events. And that put you in a tough position because only certain events made sense. So therefore it was hard to build a profitable business. So explain the software transition when you had an aha. Well, like, I get the aha of this is a crappy business, but then tell me like where the software vision fit in and when what made you think that transition would solve it, and then what was the vision for software as you transitioned?
Yeah, I'll take this. So again, like trial and error, like just being in it. Another Wesleyan connection. We get a random phone call from this guy, David Schreff, who is like, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing this lacrosse recruits thing for other sports?" And we're like, "Yeah, like at some point we always thought we'd do other sports." He's like, "Would you ever do this for volleyball?" And I'm like, this is such a weird conversation. Ends up David Schreff is a Wesleyan alum who's the president of USA Volleyball, and he saw a feature of lacrosse recruits in the alumni magazine. So we go pitch USA Volleyball, which is like insane. Again, like now at this point, like Matt and I, we're just trying to figure it out. So we go pitch USA Volleyball and they share all their numbers with us, like how many events they run, how many participants. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is 12 times the size of the lacrosse market. We're going to just do the same playbook and we are going to be so rich. Like this is going to be amazing. So we pitch the dream, pitch this rev share, win the business. We get volleyball recruits off the ground, go out that winter with like the same concept. We're going to sell film packages from these top events tied to USA Volleyball, and this is going to just print money. What we realized in the volleyball market was it's a lot easier to capture film. The teams are more centrally organized. So there's one parent who is in charge of filming the games for the team, and that's still, what happens today. This is 10 plus years ago. So that winter, like we did like the full on the road hustling, event partnerships, talking to customers, all of this stuff. And we had very little traction. And we were like, this is a really tough business. Oh my gosh, like this is totally opposite from lacrosse. But what we realized was when you went through our volleyball users, there would be two linked parent accounts, parent A, parent B, and the same email addresses were listed on all of those parent accounts. And we were like, oh, this is so weird. Like, who is this person? It was the club director or recruiting coordinator at these clubs, and they were keeping spreadsheets of all of the volleyball recruits logins for their players so they could log in as each player and see what they were doing, who they were sending messages to, and who their favorite schools were. And that was really like the aha moment, because you're like, okay, well, volleyball is actually 10 years ahead of the lacrosse market from a club organization perspective. They own facilities, they have full-time staff, some of them run their own events, but it's a more established business. And if they're using our software in that way, like we should be building for that user, because that is a better business model. It's B2B, it's recurring. There's real value for this small business to have this software to manage the recruiting process. And we didn't rebrand and launch our B2B product until 2015. But, like Matt and I joke, like I have the mock-up still in my desk drawer from 2013 when we realized this, where we were like, oh my gosh, like this needs to be a like recruiting management platform to serve the needs of these people, because like this is where the market's going.
And so tell me about the why behind the club's involvement in the recruiting process. What's in it for the club? What does the family expect from the club? What's in it for the club? And then in what way does the club operate as it relates to the recruiting journeys of each of the members of that club?
It's a very loaded question.
Yeah. I mean, I think like very high level.
That's what I do. I come in ignorant and then ask a bunch of just follow my intellectual curiosity and don't know where any of the landmines are. That's what I do.
I guess just like very high level, as a family like progresses through like their club journey at the high school level, we believe there's like two guarantees. One is we're here to help your son or daughter become the best athlete they can be. And then two, we're going to help them through the recruiting and college placement journey. And our software filled that second need, where we were transitioning people from like pen and paper, manila folders to an online system. And like we pitch it as like, hey, the same way I use Salesforce to manage our sales team, that's how these clubs are, using SportsRecruits. So that's like very high level. And then like Matt, you could probably talk about some of like the different nuances in expectations around different sports or different types of families, but you see all sorts of deliverables from the club on those two promises.
And so talk about that, Matt, like Chris said, but also talk about what made you like why that's a loaded question.
Yeah, and so again, go back to 2013 is when we kind of realized like, wow, these clubs are really, really powerful. But you also got to remember 2013, like they barely had functioning websites. So like we had to be careful as to like, coming in like as software salesmen. So like we started talking to a lot of these volleyball club directors that we saw listed and say, hey, what's going on here? And what we heard, and this again going back a decade, was the club director was more stressed than ever because this is volleyball specifically at this point, but like volleyball as a sport has been, you can look at the grass, it's been growing nicely over the last 10, 15 years. So my club has more people in it. So I used to have one team per age group. Now I have two teams per age group, which means I have to double the number of recruitable athletes. Multiply that with parents' expectations are evolving. This is no longer, or this was less of a like play club sports. This is fun. parents are now kind of running the ROI calculator in the back of their head every event they go to. They're looking at the number of coaches at a specific event, and they're doing some calculation that's proprietary to their own brains as to whether this was a worthwhile event. So when we started talking to these club
That's
directors,
a very sophisticated algorithm.
very sophisticated. Everyone has a different algorithm. I mean, we always joke that like the funniest thing is at a tournament, parents crowding around the board that lists all the coaches there. And what they're looking for on that board is the schools that they want their kids to go to, which ironically, every parent has the same 12 to 15 schools in their head. So as long as they're on that board, this event was worthwhile. Did the coaches see their kids? Don't know, don't care. But they were on this, they were here. There's 40 fields. But like, anyway, we can go on.
You know what this makes me think about is like those startup pitch competitions where it's like, here's the VCs that will be in attendance.
It's exactly the
you
same.
You pay to pitch.
Same
pay to
thing.
pitch.
It's exactly the same thing. The guy could have been in the bathroom. The guy from Sequoia could have been in the bathroom when you were pitching your idea. But anyway, so when we started talking to these clubs and kind of unpacking it, we were essentially coming at it from a few angles, which is, one, a lot of your athletes are already doing this. Like, what if there was a way for you to see all of your athletes in one view? Would that be valuable? Yes. Obviously, what would you be willing to pay for it? But the interesting thing on the club side is it's an insurance policy in some respects against a parent that's not doing the work, because when you don't have sports recruits, you have a club of let's say 40 recruitable athletes. They're all doing their own thing, and you're a club director or a recruiting coordinator trying to figure out what they're doing. They could tell you, Jason, I sent 20 messages before we went off to Baltimore to play in this event. You have no idea whether they did that or not. What you do know is when they're a junior and the parent is frustrated because their kid isn't getting recruited, you're saying, well, what have you been up to? And you don't know. No one really knows. They're like, we went to the events with you. So it really brings the level of accountability that the club can push down, top down, and maybe and run, similar to how a sales team says, make this number of calls, right? This many touches, whatever it might be. So the clubs, it resonated really fast. We had really nice growth in the early years and through to today. But the really smart clubs realize that if they run a really tight recruiting, like let's call it curriculum/system, parents are going to talk about it, and that's going to pull kids from clubs that are not running really tight recruiting processes. Because once you get to 7th, 8th grade, like that's really kind of what the prize everyone's looking at. So the smart clubs, from early on, and a lot of them are still with us today, they went all in and said, this is going to be my differentiator. I'm going to run the best recruiting process. I'm going to make sure every kid gets the attention he or she deserves. And those people can look at their businesses now versus 10 years ago. And many of them are like literally 10 times the size as they were when they signed up with us 10 years ago.
It's funny. I mean, some of the stuff I've been thinking about sounds similar, but more focused on player development, where it's like the coach side is, here's what you should be doing in the off season. And it's like in an email or it's like a PDF or something. And it's like, who's doing it? Like, how's their form? How seriously are they taking it? Well, right. There's just no accountability at all. I see my kids peeping their heads in from the other room. Cool. So once you were selling into clubs, how did you get those first clubs on board? What was the pricing model at the time? And what did you learn? How did it go? In no particular order.
Yeah, so early day clubs, I think we had the momentum from how they were using the product before we even introduced like our B2B recruiting management tool. So they're familiar with the product, there was value, they could envision a better experience, and like we built that for them. So that was like early adopters. And I think, like 2015, 2016, we were pricing on a per team basis. So basically, a volleyball roster might be 10 to 12 student athletes. A lacrosse roster might be 22 on the girls' side, 25 on the boys' side. And you're coming up with like, what's a fair per player rate? And then applying that to a team rate. And we did a team rate because we really felt like the club had to mandate the experience for every player, because it wasn't going to be as valuable if they picked 42 of the 70 players and said, oh, these are the 42 who really need it. no, this needs to be a program wide thing. And I think that was like tough in the early days, but we definitely benefited from that because it really did force the club organizations to like get on board. And then we got lucky in that the two sports, our first two sports, lacrosse, volleyball was like best product market fit. They were ahead of other club sports, like I said, more organized. Still, like best usage comes from volleyball clubs. So we got large customers. We got customers who really value the product. So we had good retention. We had all those things in volleyball. Then you go into the lacrosse market, which was like our background. Like everyone remembered us from like hustling around all of those events. They were like, oh my gosh, maybe these guys are actually smarter than I thought. They have a real software product now. And then we went out to them.
I hope someone says that about me one day in esports. Right now, they're like, what? Like,
Yeah.
that
Well,
is someone that should
I
be
hope.
dedicated and is not.
Yeah, well, I hope it takes you less than 17 years like it took us, but yeah, now it's all worth it in the rear view mirror. But yeah, and then we went into the lacrosse market where like one like the demographic, there's like a more affluent customer base. There was more resources at the clubs to pay for things like this. And like lacrosse parents tend to be like the some of the biggest pain in the butts for a club director. So they're like, hold on, I can buy your software, run everyone through this program, keep them accountable, and then I don't really have to deal with them when they come to me and say, hey, you didn't do your job, because I can go back and be like, well, actually, you didn't do anything. And they're like, yeah, that's worth $10,000 a year. And then, from there, different sports have been, different paths. And I think that's probably like another like random topic you could go down, but like just the different cultures, the different structures within different sports. We just happened to start off in two sports that were like really good to be selling a B2B product, and like we would have had a very different product today if we were basketball guys and we sold into the basketball market.
What's interesting to me is that you found so many clubs that are willing to invest in actually differentiating with the goods, right? Because what I've observed is that in some cases you see clubs, it's almost like the better the brand of the club, the more they push onto the families to do that on their own because they can, because then the families are just grateful to be part of the club, but that a lot of the extra stuff, whether it's recruiting or development, is a la carte, right? Either through the club or somewhere else. So I guess it's interesting to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these clubs justify an expense that is an expense item and not, it doesn't add revenue or profit.
Oh, we're going to give you the full pitch here. Why it's important to retain your customers through recruiting software.
But what's funny though, is so
I'm ready.
you can find blog posts, and I thought early on that
I just poked the bear.
I thought
We've been friendly up until this point, guys.
I thought I thought in 2015, and you can find a blog post if you Google like sports recruits retention, like you can find blog posts back then where we had sent.
I'll do that after I Google sports recruits DVD. But
yes, yeah, well, yeah. You can probably find some people looking for their DVDs still from all those years that we sent them a blank one. But we thought early on that the pitch really was going to resonate that, hey, this is actually a retention purchase. This is the pain point here is clubs have a horrible retention problem, but they don't track it and a lot of them don't care. So we had all these great visuals of like, here's club A that has this retention, here's club B that has this retention. And the numbers are very close, but we showed over 5 years the amount of money that's being lost. And that could not have resonated less with clubs. Like literally they did not care. They're like, but right. I just get more kids. Like, who cares? And you're like, wait, but like if you kept them, you have one more team that's $60,000. Like, but I'll just get there's always more kids. And so we came off that. I'd say the kind of more sophisticated clubs like got that, and even to this day, I think some are tracking it better. And some of these reg products are doing a better job of like helping clubs understand that. So in terms of like in an expense, like how do you get them to add the expense? Like we found common ground with the clubs that pretty much the reason your business exists is because of this carrot that's being dangled at the end of the rainbow here. And you want to be presenting to the families a clear and concise plan as to how recruiting is going to go when your kid gets to high school. And as the years go on, you can't just say, hey, I played at Duke 20 years ago. I know all the coaches. Like that might have worked in 2013 or 2012. Like that's not going to work in 2017, 2025. It still does work for some clubs, caveat. But for the most part, the parents want more, especially as they use technology in their daily lives. Like think about just the million ways parents are interacting with technology on their personal device and their computer. Like to say the recruiting process is going to be an analog one is like it's going to hold less and less water as years go on. And so we moved away from the original kind of angle of like this is a retention play and more of like this is actually a kind of the right thing to do. And if you do it right, you're going to attract more kids to your clubs. And that resonated.
I mean, to me, what I'm hearing is it's the difference between defense and offense, right? Like defense is like, hey, like you can fly the leaky boat, right? And wait, hold on a sec. Shane, come on. God,
this is like, authentic. This is authentic con.
Yeah, she's like doing, my 10-year-old daughter's like doing jumping jacks and waving right behind the laptop and trying to get my attention. I'm tempted to bring her on camera, but yeah, I shouldn't say that out loud because she'll come. But what was I saying? Oh, yeah, defense versus offense, because the defense is like plug the leaky boat and stop the bleeding and like here's a life preserver, right? And offense is like our club is the best. Look at our track record. Like, look who we produce. Look at all these placements. Look at this process we have. Look at this technology we have. Like, go somewhere else. Like, and ask them if they have any of this.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, the best club customer is the one, and this happens to this day, where a family leaves a club with Sports Recruits. They get to the new club and they say, hey, where are my Sports Recruits credentials? Like, I want to get set up. And they go, oh, we don't use Sports Recruits. The parent literally gets up, walks out the door, and goes back to their old club. Or the club director picks up the phone right away and calls us and says, so how much does this cost? Because I had 10 players that essentially threaten to leave my club if they don't get Sports Recruits. Like the sales guys like do backflips when that happens.
Yeah, and then just like quickly on like the offense side, like I think nothing is more important to a segment of the club director population than their like commits list, because that is like the marketing gold that they're able to show potential families. So like we learned that it was
like the private school,
right, like how many kids go to Harvard or
60% of our kids ended up in the Ivy League or whatever.
Yeah. And like I think that it was funny because we came at it so much from this like SaaS software, like this retention, like because we were like trying to solve that problem on our own as we were growing the business, and we were like, oh, our customers are just like us. They're trying to solve the same problem. You kind of had two things. One, you realize like the offensive perspective, and then we also were living through like, and we still are living through it, but just like a massive shift towards club sports where, like at that point in time, nobody was like, I'm really worried about how many kids are going to show up at my tryouts. It was like, oh, well, we had another 100 kids at our tryouts, and now instead of charging $35 for the penny to show up, now we're charging $75, and like we just made all this money. Like it was,
and it's was already picked before tryouts. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, like, we've also just kind of like lived through this like crazy club sports transition over the last, 15 years too. And like, I've got an 8-year-old and a almost 6-year-old, and like, I'm living it. Like, I see it every day. And it's just like, it's fun to link back our story to just kind of general trends. And like, Matt was saying, like, these clubs didn't have a website. It was like website, registration platform. Then they bought Sports Recruits. And like, how lucky were we to be a part of that like wave? And I think kind of getting back to like your project and like the stuff we're most excited about is obviously AI, how we're using AI on a day-to-day basis, how we're building that into our product. And like, we're at the front of that wave in the sports tech space, and like more people will be talking about that from a customer club perspective. And I don't know, it kind of feels like we're back to this like exciting next thing in the space.
And Matt, remind me, kids and if so, how old are your kids?
Oh, I have a 5 and a 3-year-old, so
Okay.
we're pretty early on. No clubs, just trying to get exposure to as many hand-eye / foot-eye coordination exercises as possible in any form possible.
Great. We're not going to talk about kids yet, but I've just tucked that information away on both you guys, and we'll come back around to that later in the discussion. I didn't lose it because it's actually super relevant given the trends that you're seeing and stuff. And then and because you guys lived it yourselves and now you're living it as entrepreneurs, like what is that going to mean to the way you parent? But we'll come back to that one. But one question I didn't have for you guys is when you switched to software, I don't believe that either of you is a software engineer. So how did that go? And also, I don't think you raised much money along the way. And so, like, how did you get all this stuff built and how did you fund it?
Remember those videographer events? Remember the tents, sitting under the tents? That was how we funded it. We also started running our own recruiting events. And at one point we were, I think, running the most kids through lacrosse showcases in all of lacrosse. We had a few brands specifically in lacrosse. And so, again, we had this big lacrosse user base. And so we had a lot of email addresses. And so we go to a lot of events. So we see how the events are run and got a good handle on that. And so we started in 2009, literally early on, started running our own event. It was called Super Softs. It was for rising juniors, so sophomores that just finished their high school season. And we ran that brand and we added Super Juniors, what do we call the junior brand, Chris?
Fab Frosh.
Fab Frosh, who went down. So that was rising sophomores. We started a D3 lacrosse brand called D3 Lacrosse Showcase, which we ended up selling to 3-Step. So those events, like, again, I don't know, for any entrepreneurs watching, like, they weren't software. They weren't necessarily what we wanted to do, but they threw off a lot of cash that funded the business for many years, on top of raising a little money, doing some venture debt along the way. But we were able to find these kind of non-sexy kind of auxiliary businesses that in many ways strengthened it. We prided ourselves on our events. We thought we ran them really well. Like we treated the parents how we would imagine we would want it to be treated if we took a family there. And so a lot of those families, of course, then bought whatever the highest end package was for lacrosse recruits or sports recruits, whatever it was called at that point. So it became a nice feeder to the actual business we wanted to run as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's how I remember how we funded it, Chris. Am I missing anything?
Yeah. And I mean, there's some funny stories with that too, of like us running registration for, at the time, like the most elite lacrosse showcase event. Jake Reed, Nike Blue Chip. Jake is now living in Jupiter, Florida, but he let us run the reg for the event. And we were like, hey, Jake, do you want us to like reconcile on like a weekly basis? And he's like, no, guys, like, I trust you guys. Just like, let's settle up at the end of the summer. And then for my fall event, we'll settle up at the end of the year. Like, we weren't sophisticated enough to know it, but basically he was floating us the cash to like run our business through like cash low points for like 3 or 4 years. Like, that's just like something that like totally just randomly happened that like we lucked out. We hired a technical director who like, we obviously couldn't really evaluate tech talent. We had a technical director who like, it didn't work out with him, but he hired our first engineer, Kat, who's now our CTO. Like, total happenstance. Like, Kat has been with us since I think 2012, 2013. Like, yeah, like of all like the stars aligning things, there were like a couple of those things. We had an intern from Wesleyan, Mike Robinson, who started off as our first product hire, and like worked his way up, ran our product team, is our COO now. Like, you just kind of like, the culture probably builds those opportunities, but then we look at it where it's like the stars aligned and we were fortunate enough to have those people in those positions that really helped us build a technology company for two guys who are not technical founders.
Goff, there's so much more I want to dig into on the journey, but there's some other topics I want to make sure we hit as well. And
Yeah.
I just looked and we're already almost 45 minutes in. So maybe talk a bit about the current snapshot of the business. So, maybe filling in some of the key moments from where we are to today. And then, of course, you recently were acquired by IMG Academy. So congratulations on that. It would also be fun to talk about, whatever you want to share about how that came about, why that came about, and then what it means for the business and the category looking forwards.
Yeah. I could just kind of like quick 2 minute, us launching a B2B product in 2015. We built that business 100% growth year over year from like 15 to 18. It was a great run, but what we realized was the value of what we built was really around the network and engaging college coaches, engaging event operators on top of the clubs. We're really going to connect the pieces to make it very tough to go and compete with us in specific sports verticals. Really focused on the network, how you get those stakeholders involved. We have a product called Event Beacon that college coaches use to evaluate student athletes on site at events. And we really just saw a lot of growth across like the club segment, how many events we're using our Event Beacon product, how many college coaches are logging in on a monthly basis to proactively find new athletes. And like those things came together, and that has been like our focus from like a product company perspective over the last couple of years. Like we feel like we have the strongest recruiting network in a bunch of sports verticals. And that really led to this opportunity with IMG Academy because club has become more influential and like we really get the club market. We really get the pieces that need to be in place for this to be successful. And I think that was a unique position for us and was definitely something that was like very attractive from the IMG Academy perspective.
Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's also an aspect that our scale, because of selling into clubs, when we sign up a club, we get anywhere from, 100 to 1,000 kids all at once. And so, our footprint within the space wasn't quite exponential growth, but like if you go back 5 years, I mean, we had sub 100,000 athletes. Now there's over 600,000 athletes on the SportsRecruits platform. So by working directly with clubs and also working directly with events that use our Event Beacon product, our footprint, was growing. It was continuing to grow. So obviously IMG has a massive footprint as well. And so, when you start kind of thinking about what the best experience is for a student athlete, you essentially get to a place where you want to make it as easy as possible for the college coaches. You don't want the college coaches to have to straddle multiple platforms to, and sometimes look at the same kids. Like a kid might have a profile over on NCSA and they might have one over on SportsRecruits, but the best experience for the college coach is going to be on hopefully on one platform over time. So, as you start kind of just looking at who has big footprints in the space, you keep the student athlete in mind. And, our mission statement is to empower student athletes to pursue their dreams. And, part of that is trying to find ways to hopefully make their lives easier. And the best experience for a student athlete is to have their information in one place. So when a college coach wants Matt Wheeler's video and Matt Wheeler's grades, that coach knows exactly where to go. And so the kind of that vision is still kind of still unfolding, but obviously the resources and the reach that IMG has will allow SportsRecruits to kind of continue to flourish.
And I know that IMG has been acquisitive before. Look at that fancy word. But do they have a playbook in terms of what they tend to do with the acquired companies in terms of a degree of integration, a degree of independence? Is there a set model? Has it been different case by case? And then what are the plans and expectations with SportsRecruits?
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about their playbook because I would say they acquired NCSA a few years back. They had some history with that company. They haven't done a ton of acquisitions like in the space. And I think when you looked at our positioning versus like what they offered, it made a lot of sense. right now we're operating as a subsidiary. The Sports Recruits brand, still exists. Our partners brand still exists with women's lacrosse or men's lacrosse or the Field Hockey Coaches Association. But I think the bigger vision, and one that was like pretty easy for us to get on board with, is like, I'm in my early 40s. I'm a former athlete. I've got young kids who are playing sports. I'm trying to become a better golfer. I take golf lessons. I
By the way, that sounds old to me, but I forget that I'm almost 50.
I know. I know. I know. Um,
You take golf
but
lessons. Keep going. Keep going.
take golf lessons. Like, you go to the gym and you have a trainer. You have a CEO coach who's basically like a therapist. So I'm 42. I'm doing all those things. And my belief is that when my 8-year-old and almost 6-year-old are going through their sports journey, we will be more likely to look for those sort of resources for them. And I think that IMG Academy is uniquely positioned to give a very high quality experience around performance coaching, nutrition, recruiting coaching, recruiting technology. And like, that makes a lot of sense for us right now, where like the future of the product is going. So I think right now we're operating as Sports Recruits. Our customer experience is the same, but like, that is the vision that like we got on board with for the future.
Nice. Well, it's a really exciting one. I mean, a few different threads it'd be great to pull on. One is everything we just talked about the recruiting side. What are you seeing from these clubs in terms of where this sits relative to player development? Is player development on par with recruiting in terms of the focus? Is it ahead? Is it behind? Does it depend on the sport? I mean, Matt, something you said to me a few weeks ago sticks out in my head just about how different the landscape is in every different sport. And that came up today with volleyball versus lacrosse. But yeah, just generally, what are you seeing on the player development side in terms of providing player development outside of the formal team-based activities?
I mean, yeah, a challenge in youth sports is that we Sports Recruits are really one of the only companies that have been able to thrive in multiple sports. I mean, you see a lot of products that do well in individual sports, but it's tough to make the leap from sport to sport because they share that they're a sport, but that's about where the similarities end. And so in terms of the development, I mean, it not only is it sports specific, it is club specific, and there's certain clubs we know that really ride the athletes, and they're trying to literally like kind of they're trying to stimulate like college level practices for these kids on Tuesday nights. And there's others that, might focus on getting into the best events possible, and they're maybe aren't running as rigorous of a kind of training regimen. But I don't think we're necessarily as close to enough clubs to answer it, as well as we just know a lot of the players at a lot of these clubs, and we know they all have different philosophies as to kind of how to run this. So I think for a family, listening, if you happen to be listening an hour in, it's really just a matter of finding a club that you think fits what kind of what you might be looking at or what you think is going to work for your student athlete. Chris is closer to that than I am because he's got an 8-year-old, so we might be thinking of this.
Yeah. Look, the stuff that I see just like talking with a lot of our club customers is more developed clubs will offer that coaching training on the side as an additional revenue stream to, really control the experience. I live on Long Island. Lacrosse is a hotbed on Long Island. Most kids at the high school level are doing additional training either with their club in the off season or through a like preferred vendor that is affiliated with the club. That's happening. The same thing is happening on the, on the volleyball side. I think, the academy structure on the soccer side, like the Sousa team here on Long Island, like they're providing that training. There's not a great way to track stuff that's happening off site. So what's happened is they have filled the nights with off-season training, afternoon training, and that's like really filled the void. But that is like this like top of the pyramid kind of like club experience. So, when you get down, we haven't seen anything that's like truly organized, truly built into workflows other than pay me the money, show up at this time, and I'm going to do the training.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've been thinking about is almost like more of like a Peloton like experience. It's like, what are the things that you can be doing in your own time outside of the formal stuff? And could you provide more structure, accountability, fun, competitiveness, challenges, guidance, form review, like, et cetera, on your own time from your living room?
Yeah.
And obviously you can't do that for everything. And it depends on the sport in terms of what things you can do. But conditioning, mobility, hand-eye coordination, film review, in hockey, things like shooting and stick handling.
Yeah. I guess I would turn this question back to you. Like, when in your athletic journey would you have liked these tools the most? Because I've been thinking about this from like my 8-year-old's perspective, like when it would be appropriate to be focusing on these things. And then like when in my life I thought I would have been ready for these things.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you as a dad and as a former player about, the privatization of club sports and year round and the rise of professional skills instruction and burnout and overuse injuries and youth sports as a business. And I mean, there's a lot kind of baked in there. And that's some of the topics I've been pressure testing on the show, both as a dad, because I'm trying to figure out like how to be the best dad for my kids, but also as an entrepreneur who's thinking about building a platform in the space. Like, I don't want to be part of the problem, right? Like, if I'm going to do something here, like, I actually want to do something that I'm proud of that feels like it is setting up kids and families for long-term success versus just another hand in the wallet that's like feeding on insecurities and FOMO and competing with the Joneses and everything else, right? I don't necessarily have the answer, especially because I talked to a sports psychologist recently as an example who said that if you talk to the dads about whether the kid's motivation for doing X, Y, and Z, and then you talk to the kid when the dad's not in the room, you get very different answers, right? If you look at social media, right, you see little Timmy has an Instagram account from the age of 6, posting all the drills they're doing at home every night, right? That little Timmy, right? Or is that the dad? How does little Timmy feel about this? Is it because little Timmy wants to play in the NHL? Or is it because little Timmy, wants access to his phone and he knows he's going to lose if he doesn't do his drills, right? So
Right.
I don't necessarily have answers. I think and to further complicate things, if I'm sitting in the sprint chair for a minute, I grew up in a very loving house. My parents tried to give us every opportunity, but they weren't athletes. And they also were kind of hippies in yuppie clothes, right? There wasn't a lot of pushing. There wasn't a lot of direction. There wasn't a lot of structure. There wasn't a lot of like driving us to reach our fullest form. And so as a result, it's a great childhood, right? But I definitely didn't reach my fullest form, right?
Right.
And so, I'm trying to differently with my kids in that regard. I think the loving part and the happy part is very important, right? But like I kind of feel like I need to be whipped a little more, right? And so, I'm trying to, but then it's like, what's a healthy version and what's an unhealthy version? And where's the line? And how do you know which side of it you're on? Like,
Right.
after if I know.
But I think the thing that I come back, I'm gonna try to use to ground myself as my kids get into it is that, one, if you talk to the parents, talk to the kids separated, you're gonna get different answers as to like, why are you doing this? And so that's one piece. But then when you get to college, and again, we played at Wesleyan, which is a Division III school. We were a competitive Division III school in Division III. And even at our level, but if it's even more true, if you're talking at these D1 schools that all the parents think their kids are going to go to or think that the kids have to go to, when you get to that college level, and again, I'm talking all the way through D3, the kids that are going to play on the team, they're going to play and they're going to thrive and are going to have leadership position on the team. The motivation in college has to come from within that athlete because mom and dad are now gone and now you're, kind of property of the coach and that staff. And so I think the thing that is, I don't know, kind of grounding is that like the kid has to, if again, playing in college is the goal and playing, meaning like you're going to play and you're going to contribute, whatever, like all those kids that actually play on those teams, like are really into it. Like they're doing the workouts. They don't need the accountability necessarily. Like they're into it. And so I think, I guess what I hear from talking to friends who have older kids is like, they can kind of go to an event and watch these kids, even in high school, and be like, those 8 kids like don't care about lacrosse anymore. Like they are tapped. Like and they could be, some of them could be talented too, but like that talent, when you get to that next level, whatever that next level is going to be, like the kids you're going to get beaten out and it's going to be over. So I don't know. I feel like there's some aspect of all of this is like, how do you let the kids run wild and like find that love? And it also, that flame might extinguish when they're in 10th grade, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, Chris, coming back to your question, I feel like the older and the more serious the kid is, the easier that answer. It's like, oh, it's got to come from the kid. Like, this isn't a platform for people that don't want it. It's a platform for people that want it. I think where it gets murky is as you start going down to the younger kids, right? Because then it's like, what role should the parent play? What role does the parent play? Like, how much you involve the parent in the process, right? Like, because maybe not all the kids, but most of the little guys that are doing the regular stuff, that structure is being put upon them. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And how do you know, right? I mean, if it's like if you're trying to drag your dog out for a walk and the dog is digging his heels in and it won't want to go, like maybe you shouldn't call your kid. Use the analogy with your kid, but if the kid is digging their heels in and they don't want to go, like that's a tell, right? But if the kid is wagging their tail when you're doing all this stuff, right? Well, then it's probably okay. But like if you weren't providing it, would the kid be asking for it? Maybe in certain exceptional cases, yet. But in my opinion, a high percentage of those kids that are doing all that stuff wouldn't be asking for it, even if they enjoy it while they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, how much structure should you be providing? Like, how much focus should you have on a single sport? And, like, that's going to come down to family to family, kid to kid. And I don't have answers, but for the kids that it does make sense for, which is some percentage of the kids, right? There should be more structure and resources for those kids, right? So it's like, I know there's something there and it can do good. I think the devil's in the details and the nuances around like the gray area. There's black and there's white, but it's like the gray area is, I think, where it gets just a little trickier to manage.
Yeah. And again, like I go back to my like personal, sports journey, and like very much by like 8th grade, I like loved lacrosse. And I might not have been that good of an athlete, but I loved lacrosse and ended up, playing Division III lacrosse. And then like, we're not quite there with my 8-year-old, because I feel like this is the spread, let's say in between like 8 and 13, where like some of those things really develop. And, not to go into like a parenting philosophy rant, which I'm like not qualified to do at all, but like, really all you're trying to do
sports rants, Chris, but
really like all you're trying to do is like help develop like good kids that love something. And for me, very much it's just like, yeah, we need a new basketball hoop, because I need to play basketball with my kids in the driveway so they like enjoy being around their dad. And then like I'm also like, oh, so they also understand offensive and defensive concepts of like help defense, positioning, like all this stuff. And that's like me being a little crazy, but like that's how I'm like thinking about things. But we're like not quite there of like, oh, hey, Jack, who's my 8-year-old, like let's go to the like batting cages so we can like work on your swing. And I think it's like tough, like where you kind of like wade into that water over the next couple of years.
I want to say something about that. So to further complicate things, right? Most of the kids love playing the games. Anytime it's competitive, anytime they're with their buddies, immediately the fun factor doubles or triples or quintuples or whatever, right? But then it's the individual skills at home. That's like flossing your teeth or going to the dentist or like, or something worse than that, right? Like few sickos like that, right? But like most of them don't like it, right? And then the narrative, right, is like, oh, if they don't like it, they must not love the game, right? And it's like, well, that's not fair. It's like, what if you package it in a way that it wasn't like flossing your teeth? What if you could introduce those competitive elements or the social elements from home, remotely and digitally, the way that Peloton has for sitting on your boring exercise bike, right? So if you're making it fun, right, isn't that a good thing? And then it's like, no, they should be out doing free play. It's like, okay, well, they'll go out in the neighborhood and do free play, except there is no neighborhood anymore. And there is no free play because everyone's so effing overscheduled, right? And it's like, look, I would less schedule my kid if everyone else wasn't overscheduled, but there's no one around, so I have to overschedule them because otherwise they're going to torture me, right? And then it's like, well, they're not going to learn how to be self-directed. It's like, okay, well, let me try to have them learn how to be self-directed. I'll give them a day off. And then it's like on the day off, you get so tortured that it's like, okay, they're never going to have another day off again. And then the cycle perpetuates, right? There's a little ghost of Christmas future, right? In terms of like, and granted, my oldest is only 13, so I'm kind of on the front end and dealing with a lot of crap, right? But I'm a little further along, and that's what I've observed so far.
Yeah.
I'm excited to watch this this app, this product. We don't know the format.
I don't know what it is.
I'm not even going to put it in a box, but watch it come together, because I saw your post about tricking your kid into going and shooting pucks and hitting pipes or whatever the game you were playing, and like that 100% is spot on. If you say, hey, let's go do some boring drill, no, I don't want to do that. Or I'll bet you an ice cream cone that I can hit more pipes than you, and then it's like, oh, it's on. And like, yeah, before you know it, it's 2 hours later, and you went from not wanting to go shoot pucks at all to shooting pucks for 2 hours.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. It's like, isn't that a good thing? And it's like, why to do it wrong, right? And then it gets just then it just gets back to like individual parenting philosophies, and there's no right answer, and depends on the kid, and read your kid, and it's kind of like it's the same, like, don't tell me how to parent. It's like, don't tell me how to sport parent, Like, everyone's just figuring it out for themselves. So whatever.
I will say, what kept Chris and I going all these years, 17 years, was, it was so cool to see, obviously, as our scale grew, like early on, it was like, the kid we knew, the family we knew, because we only had 100 members. And as you grew, the stories would get better. But, it is awesome to see kids take sport and go from a family in some random part of the country to the Stanford to play softball. And like that, those stories are happening every day on the platform. And so I think, being a part of a mission-driven company was awesome, because yes, you're worried about retention and all these like metrics that go on some spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, these kids that really wanted it, like we talked about wanting it, right, and being addicted to the sport, like these kids were out there working their tails off, and the outcome was going to college for the first person in your family, going and playing in national championship games, and it's important to always see that there are really positive outcomes from this, outside of the weirdness happening in each of our towns from the ages of like 13 to 16 or 17 or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's about perspective too. Like, I think the whole like ROI, because this is going to be the ticket out to pay for school and stuff. Like, gosh, it's, at least in the hockey world, that seems like you're better off just taking, going and buying 1,000 scratch tickets or something if that's your motivation, right? Because like the odds are, the house always wins in those cases. And if there's like one outlier that everyone points to that gives them hope, like that doesn't change the odds, right? But like in our house, it's like, okay, it's about structure, it's about learning discipline, it's about good habits, it's about learning how to achieve mastery in something, it's about combining passion with work ethic, right? And it's about those lessons that can then carry over to so many other aspects of life. Like, look, if my kids end up playing their games at a high level, that's great, but like, we're not about to start making decisions as a family that are going to optimize for the short term at the expense of the long term. And I would say, although athletics is a long career, the entire athletic career, in my mind, is the short term.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, great. This was awesome. What didn't I ask you guys that you wish I did, or what parting words might you have for listeners that we didn't already cover?
We're running an hour and 10 minutes, so I feel like we covered a lot. But I think our journey like has been driven by, like Matt was saying, it's like going to college is a life-changing event. Playing team sports creates better, like we believe it creates better people that are going to be like better humans in the general world. And like we were able to build a company around those things, and that's like core to who we are as people. So like that is a very special thing. And I would say, as you're figuring out your path, like mastery, like motivation, like figuring out what those like core values that you want to instill on this like group of potential users, that is the most motivating thing. That is like the most powerful thing that you're going to do with your product. And I think that's why we're excited about it and to see where it goes.
Matt.
No, I don't think. I mean, I think the one of the things that Chris and I hang our hat on is that we remain friends throughout this whole journey. And a lot of co-founders start businesses and it can go sideways. I mean, we know families, brothers start businesses and it goes sideways. And so I think we were it's when if you're adding a co-founder, I think there's you should try to spend a good amount of time with that co-founder before you start a business. And fortunately, we had a lot of reps in college running our fraternity, running the lacrosse team, running the captain's practices. So, but I think the part of our story too.
We already talked offline, but I loved your fraternity.
Part of our story, yeah. Part of our story is running a business with your best friend for all these years and coming out the other side in one piece.
Yeah.
Well, great point to end on, guys. Awesome story. I'm sure there's a lot of sub stories, micro stories that didn't come out here, but really inspiring journey. Congrats on the great outcome and the beginning of a new chapter, and really excited to keep the dialogue going. And also just thanks, Matt, for the help and cheerleading that you've done along the way. And then Chris, big expectations from you in terms of the help and cheerleading that you'll do going forward, now that we've broken the ice and Matt.
100%.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you.